Staff, we are now live.
Thank you, Amy. Hello, everybody. This is Steph Munson-Dahl from the City of Asheville's Planning and Urban Design Department. Welcome to the joint work session of the Multimodal Transportation Committee and the Downtown Commission. Today, we're going to be talking about public space management and Asheville shared space, and it's going to be a bit of a fun time. We'll have a lot of interactive stuff going on, and I wanted to just say thank you for anyone at home for waiting for us. We did have some technical difficulties and overlap of meetings that meant we needed to start at 2:15. We're going to start the meeting off today with roll calls of both commissions. Randy Warren is acting as chair of the Multimodal Transportation Commission. Randy?
Thanks, Stephanie. Yes, welcome everyone. Dennis Wenzel is unfortunately called away today, so he's unable to be here. But I want to welcome the members of the Multimodal Transportation Commission. And when I call your name, would you like to introduce yourself, please, and tell us what interest you represent? So again, I'm Randy Warren. I'm also on the Bike Ped Task Force. Michael Stratton.
Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. My name is Michael Stratton, and I'm currently an at-large member on the Multimodal Commission.
Thank you, Michael. Kenny Armstrong.
Hello. I'm also on the Greenway Committee as well.
Thanks, Kenny. Pat Katz.
Hi, everybody. I'm at large, although my husband is a big bicyclist, so I'm a little biased that way. Thank you.
Thanks, Pat. Maggie Ullman.
Hey, y'all. I'm Maggie. I'm also on the Bike Ped Task Force.
Thanks, Maggie. Bill Loftus.
Bill Loftus here. I'm on the Greenway.
Thanks, Bill. Anna Sexton.
Anna Sexton here, representing the Neighborhood Advisory Committee.
Thanks, Anna. Joe Archibald.
Hi, everyone. Joe Archibald. I am the Planning and Zoning Liaison to the Multimodal Transportation Commission. Hey, Guillermo. Good to see you again.
Thanks, Joe. John Busson, he was called away for a work thing last minute, and so he's not here. Kim Rooney is our council member representative. I'm not sure if Kim is here or not. Is she?
Good afternoon.
Thanks, Kim. Good to have you here. Thanks, Stephanie.
Thank you. Chair Brian Moffitt of the Downtown Commission, will you do roll for your board?
I can do roll. I don't know that everybody wants to introduce themselves. Some of them might shoot me. So I'm Brian Moffitt, the chair of the Downtown Commission. I'm a local architect. Our vice chair is Ruth Summers. Ruth, say hello.
Hi, I'm Ruth Summers. I serve on the Grove Arcade Public Market Foundation. I have been their executive director for 16 years, so I'm very interested in preservation.
And Dane Berringer for his absolute swan song.
Yeah, this is my last meeting with the Downtown Commission after 8 years on the Downtown Commission. So I don't know what I'll do next, but I know I'm helping Maggie Ullman get elected city council, so we'll see what happens there.
Very good. Is Franzi here? I didn't see her. I do not. Andrew Fletcher, I think I saw him.
Good afternoon. It's Andrew Fletcher here. I serve on the Public Space Management Committee. I'm also a board member of the Asheville Music Professionals. I work with the Asheville Buskers Collective, and I'm deeply ingrained with the success and the life of downtown. And of course, that includes ways to get downtown and get around downtown. So I'm really glad to be in this joint meeting. And along with Maggie, I'm also a candidate for Asheville City Council.
Is Kimberly here? I don't see her on the list. No, Kimmy's not here. Okay. Stephen Lee should be joining us shortly. I hope he's supposed to. Robin, I think I gave her a break before she got in here. Robin, are you here? Say hello.
Hello, I'm Robin Rains. I'm on the Downtown Commission, and I am on the Design Review Committee. And I am an architect in downtown, and a cyclist and a runner and a car driver and all the things. So I'm excited to be here today.
Cool. Gio, did you come back? I thought I saw him. leave and then come back. Gio does everything. He's on planning and zoning. He's landscape, and he's on I don't know. He does lots of stuff. He'll be back in a minute. And then I don't think Megan is here. Megan Rogers, is she? No.
I'm here.
Oh, you're here? Say hello.
Yep. Hi, Megan with the Asheville Downtown Association.
Perfect. And I don't think Sage was going to join us on this meeting, but oh, no, there she is.
Hey, I'm here. I'm jumping back and forth between the last two meetings, but and I walk, drive, and all. I also drive electric and all the things. I am multimodal.
Perfect. Thank you. All right. Back to you, Steph.
Thanks. And I did see Gio show up. Gio, you want to say hi?
Yeah, before I quit on you. I hope this is not another one of those P&Z meetings where I had to go like from my Mac to an iPad to a telephone at Helen's Bridge. But I will do that if it means getting through this meeting. Hi, I'm Guillermo Rodriguez. Everyone calls me Gio. I've been on planning I just stepped off planning and zoning. I'm a landscape architect by profession. I love urban design. I love the urban downtown. It excites me to see people in public spaces and to be able to help the city, guide its way through a really nice, dense downtown, which I've had experience living in. So, big portion. Thanks.
Fantastic. That's a great segue because I want to let you know that our staff also loves downtown. We're going to be talking about downtown today, but in urban spaces and the public realm. So much so that we have developed a couple things to help us commit more to working on the public realm and the things that you're interested. I wanted to let you know, if you don't already know, that in the Planning and Urban Design Department, we have a fairly new division called Urban Design and Place Strategies. And that division includes myself, David Hazard, who's an urban designer, and Dana Frankel, who most of you know, who's our downtown planning manager. And then we're bringing on one more urban designer who's going to specialize in placemaking and public art. She'll be starting on December 28th. In addition to that, our team coordinates an interdepartmental group that includes folks from parks, capital projects, transportation, public works, and they're called the Urban Design Working Group. So they've been up and running kind of along the same time frame that this new division has been up and running. And this new division has really served as the coordinating body for Asheville's share space. And I would say that with the largest partnership happening between transportation, planning and urban design, and DSD. So what you need to take away from that is it takes a village to get all of this stuff done. I think you already know that. But there is probably a group of a dozen people behind the scenes on that. You'll get to meet some of them today. Want to just note what I think that you should walk away with at the end of the day. 3 things. The first is that you should better understand the Asheville Shares Space program as it is right now, just the current status of it, and then the framework that we're using, which is called the Public Space Management Framework. And Dana's going to talk about that first thing to make decisions moving forward. We also want you to think about number 2, like what this select group of stakeholders, just the 2 commissions and some of the other folks that are on the line, is really thinking about the program, right? So you should walk out of this meeting, have a better sense of how people are thinking. Is there a diversity of opinions on some of the issues we're facing? Or is it pretty homogenous and people kind of all know what we want to do moving forward? We're going to accomplish that by having some discussion, but some of it is going to be through a system where you're going to need to use your phone. So if you don't have your phone or a way to get on another website on your computer easily, just take 30 seconds right now and grab something if you can. You won't have to punch in any codes. It'll be really easy, a really easy URL. But we're going to ask you to also put any questions you have in the chat as we're going along. So we're going to make sure we get to all of those. And if we can't, well, I shouldn't say that. We're going to try to get to all of those. And if we can't, we'll follow up on any of those questions. But we ask you, please do not have conversations on the chat, right? Just as normal. This is just for us to be able to collect your questions in an organized manner. We want to be fair and transparent to the folks that are watching at home. So no conversations on that chat. So the third thing that you should walk away with is a better understanding of the challenges that city staff thinks that we're facing and how we would like to move forward in a way for you to provide us feedback on that in the coming weeks and months so that we can do this together. So a big thank you before we begin to say that it's kind of critical that we get not only your opinion, but a larger group of people's opinions. We've been doing that, and you'll see that, on how we use our public space, because it really is very important. So before we dive right in, we're going to see if there's any public comment. Amy, did we receive any public comment?
We did not.
Okay, great. Dana, how about let's pull up that presentation. And just remember, you guys, if you can mute most of the time, just in case you get some background noise, that is really helpful. Here we are. And now we're going to look at what our agenda is going to be. So we've gotten through the welcome and introductions. As I mentioned, we're going to talk about the public space management framework that sets the stage for the work that we're doing today. We're going to talk all about Asheville shared space. Remember, put your questions in the chat, and then we'll get to next steps. So let's dive right in. So we got some icebreaker questions. So we're going to start out. You're going to put this into your phone, ahaslides.com/DTCMMTC. We're going to give you, since we're going to give you a little bit more extra time on this one, since everybody's got to get to this website either on their phone or on their computer. All right, we got 9 out of 30. So this is set up as a word cloud. So it should be, I thought that said pediatrics for a second. Interesting. Taking a look at it just to see that there's a couple, there's one thing in particular that we don't necessarily have in here, but it's good to see that, and that we can talk about trolley because I know some info.
I like whoever said hi. Hi back.
Nice.
Yeah, I said hi. I don't think I understood appropriately how to use the thing. So I said enter a word. It didn't say. I thought on the next page we get to put our question in, not on the first page.
Has everybody had a chance here? I think we've got at least 24 people. Okay, you can read this, but I'll read it too. What are 2 words that you'd use to describe a successful public space? The first words seem to be all in the same vein. Nice. Okay, I still see that those first words, inviting, safe, and welcoming, seem to be pretty top there, but heavily utilized. All right. What's your favorite public space downtown? Okay, I'm going to ask, since you guys got all political on us and noted that Maggie Ullman and Andrew Fletcher are running. So can you guys each really quickly just tell us what you said and why? Am I getting in trouble for letting you advertise? You're
Like, you want us to talk to what our responses were?
Yeah, if you would just share, if you feel comfortable saying this is what I put down and it's because of X.
Sure. I put down safe, and I even put it down twice because I think that who doesn't want to be safe? And starting from a place where we all agree is, I think, how you move forward. And then with my multimodal lens hat on, I think about how we have more pedestrian deaths than anywhere else, and how much congestion of people, bikes, cars happen downtown, that really centering safety for our public space is a good place to start. And then my favorite place downtown is Triangle Park. I just love the mural that's come together and what that represents in our history with Eagle Market Street, and the trees there are really pretty. Thanks.
Thank you, Maggie. Andrew?
Yeah, I wrote welcoming and diverse. And when I mean diverse, I don't just mean like a diverse population of people, but I mean diverse uses. And when I mean welcoming, I mean all the ingredients that go into welcoming, which you need all of, I think, to be successful. And that includes safety and comfort, like places to sit, and cleanliness, and places to put trash, and all of that, just all of the sort of furniture that makes and characteristics that make a place welcoming.
Great, thank you. Okay, I
Oh,
think
and my favorite place. I forgot
yeah,
my favorite place. The Flatiron Wall Street sort of intersection, because I think it represents what I think makes cities really great is a large number of small places that work together to create a greater network. When you round that corner, you feel surprised and sort of cozy and welcoming. And it's both, it shows a diversity of uses, it's welcoming, and there's often really good busking there. And it also is a great example of a shared street. And I hopefully is an example for the rest of the city and our work today.
all right, thank you. So Dana is gonna start us out right now talking about a document that we worked on with a task force. Most of the work was done right before COVID. Dana, you want to start?
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Excited to have these conversations with you today and get your feedback. Do just want to point out that we're really focusing, we're talking about public space, but we're really talking about public space in our downtown, urban public space. So some of this could apply to other areas of our city, but I think today's conversation is really focused on our downtown. And we wanted to start by discussing and providing some updates on an initiative that we began several years ago that can really help us think about uses of public space and lay a foundation for analysis and decision making moving forward. And that's our downtown public space management framework. Several of you were involved with a lot of this work. Most of it took place in late 2018 and 2019. Many of you had not been involved, and for those of you who were involved, it's been a little while since we've talked about it, so we're happy to be able to provide some updates today. So just setting the stage a little bit on why this work was initiated in the first place. And this is, you all know this. We have a really busy downtown. We've seen significant growth pretty much in all areas, especially over the past 10 years since our downtown master plan was completed. Having a busy downtown is a relatively good problem or challenge to have, but there's a lot of conflicting and competing uses of public space. I'll also say that when we're talking about public space today, and in the context of this framework, we are really mostly talking about streets and sidewalks, the public right-of-way. So, there's different competing uses, there's competing benefits, and to be honest, depending on whether you're a business owner, whether you're a busker, whether you're a staff person in the public works department or in the transportation department, we all have different lenses on how we're viewing these various benefits and uses of public space. And we have very narrow sidewalks, right? So over the past several years, the need has come up in different ways that we could all benefit from a more holistic look at the various uses of this space and the trade-offs between those uses, and really to work towards a shared understanding of the positive and negative impacts of these various components and how they shape people's experiences downtown. I'll also just note, staff makes one-off decisions quite frequently. Should we put a push cart in this location? Should we let this restaurant, do a bulb out and all of these things? And so a shared understanding and foundation really can help us have a better framework for decision making and represent you all, the public, a little bit better. So, and we just thought, we definitely wanted to revisit this in the context of the ABL Shares Space program, because all of that is in public space, and we have done all this great work to try to lay out a foundation. So we have been having intentional conversations about downtown public space management for quite some time, and just wanted to go back a few years to give a little background. There was a downtown stakeholder group formed in 2014 that met regularly. A lot of their work culminated in a public forum that took place in 2016. Staff was working really closely with the Public Safety Committee of Council at the time, and a few main initiatives came out of that work. Some changes to how street performances are managed, and the city partnered with the Buskers Collective to launch a pilot program that reduced congestion in certain areas. We developed a brochure in partnership with the Buskers Collective to help educate folks on what the rules are. We got feedback through a public survey, and I've put links to these different resources in here if you guys want to check them out at some point. Staff also made some changes to push cart placement, really just looking at some congested areas. And we were directed to explore the possibility of a pedestrian mall on Wall Street. And so we did work for a couple years very closely with the businesses on Wall Street to do a series of programs and explore possibilities, understand their needs, and try to advance pedestrian-oriented activity there and explore the possibility of regular closures. So, that work was incremental, but I think in going through it, it also highlighted the need for a little bit more of a cohesive approach to recognize the interconnectedness of all of this work in our public space. So we started looking towards creating this framework. Staff created a framework. We took a stab at it, an interdepartmental team. We went to the Downtown Commission and they were like, should city staff really be creating this public space management framework? Like, I think that the public should be more involved in creating what this is. So we said, great. They organized a committee, Public Space Management Committee of the Downtown Commission. Andrew head that up as chair, and worked really hard for a couple of years to develop a survey, analyze that survey, and staff, based on all their good work, has been working now for a little while on creating this resulting framework. And I just want to point out, and because we want to re-engage or reform the Public Space Management Committee, they haven't met since before COVID, there was a lot of intention behind who is represented on this group. And I just wanted to list that representation here, and we'll be following up to revisit that and try to get that group meeting again. So this public survey, this very thoughtful public survey, was launched in 2019. And we got a lot of feedback. We asked a lot of demographic questions really to understand who we were hearing from. And we really wanted to ask, we knew if we asked what people wanted in public space, it would be like, we want it all, you know, but we can't have it all. And we have such, we really have limited sidewalk space to work with, unfortunately, in our downtown. So we asked people to rate various uses of public space and let us know what impacts them positively, what impacts them negatively. I'll just highlight a few here. Greenery and plantings had a very positive impact on people's experience downtown. I think that was the top most positive. Outdoor dining was primarily positive. Street performance is positive. Construction-related street closures was very negative. And, you know, it might seem obvious in a way, but I'll tell you that it's really not, because there are downsides to each of these. There's downsides to dining. There's downsides to even having plantings that take up space. So it's important for us to be able to get this feedback. We asked the question in a slightly different way with some additional uses of public space, and asked folks what contributes to a positive experience. And we asked about things like bike racks, on-street parking, off-street parking, restroom facilities, public art. And again, trees and shade is on top. Unobstructed space for walking and mobility was second to that. Greenery and planting, sidewalk lighting, and at the bottom, not that it was necessarily an issue, but not as much importance, availability of loading zones, which I would beg to differ because we hear about that a lot, but young adult facilities, ease and availability of rideshare, and you guys can take a look through this when you'd like to. So, and I know I'm doing a lot of talking, but I promise we're going to be more engaging soon. So with the survey results, our Public Space Management Committee went through an exercise where we had these various principles and values, things like, and I'm not sure if you can read them all, but people can move freely from place to place. Public space is activated when multiple spaces are multi-purpose. I guess those are the sub-values. But anyway, we went through each of the elements. Yes, absolutely. We have them to share with you for sure. We went through kind of the elements that ended up on top and the elements that ended up on bottom. And we determined, or the committee determined, whether they support these values and goals or whether they are in conflict with these values and goals. So it was an interesting exercise. And really, I would say this exercise is the meat of what of our resulting framework. And I'll just provide one example because it's about 25 pages, so we can't get through it today, but it's not exhaustive. But one example, or for about 14 different uses, we included in the report survey feedback, public benefits and positive impact of that use, concerns, negative impacts of those uses, and then some guidelines and recommendations. And just as an example, and in the framework, there's multiple bullet points under each of these, but have a description, what we heard about outdoor dining. we recognize that that a public benefit positive impact is outside dining supports the success of local restaurants and bars and can serve as a placemaking tool for enhancing activity, vibrancy, and public enjoyment in the urban environment. Concerns or negative impacts. Tables, seating, and other structures can encroach into the walking pathway, which obstructs accessibility and mobility. So a resulting guideline under outdoor dining is approval of outdoor dining areas should be secondary to the safe movement of pedestrians and to the placement and health of street trees. So we really tried to recognize where the prioritization was in terms of these uses and consider how we can maximize support of the positive impacts and manage to the extent possible the negative impacts. So with all this, our next steps are to reestablish the Public Space Management Committee. And I think today we'd be interested to hear if anyone in particular on the Multimodal Commission is interested. We still have some folks on the Downtown Commission that will reconvene and we'll work through representation and next steps there. With that group and also with some more internal vetting, we'll finalize the framework we've worked on and the recommendations. And really the idea of this document, it's less so a formal, city adopted plan and more so a tool for us internally to help with review processes and decision making. It can also help with prioritization when we're able to make program and policy updates. It provides guidance for this newly formed urban design working group, which is great. And it can serve as a foundation for future streetscape planning and future updates to the downtown master plan that deal with the public realm. And with that, I think I'd just like to open this up. We don't have, for all of the other topics we're discussing, we have fun questions for you. We don't have specific questions here, but if folks have questions, we'd love to open it up.
There are a few questions that are already in the chat.
Oh, great. Let's see.
So first one is just to let the folks at home that are watching know that Dana was referring to Maggie's questions about sharing the slides. We absolutely can share this presentation and we'll put it on both the Multimodal and Downtown Commission websites for folks. And then the other question was from Michael, were there any specific questions included in the survey pertaining to conversion of streets to pedestrian streets? And then a chime in from Randy saying, or multimodal streets. So what about converting streets?
That's a good question. And I'll ask, and I know it's been a little while, but I might ask Andrew to back me up a little bit too. We talked through this in circles, and I think where we landed is that we wanted to ask people about use of, we wanted to ask people about parking, and we wanted to ask people about dining, and we wanted to ask people about multimodal infrastructure to some extent, but I think we wanted to stay away from categorizing certain areas. Like we really wanted to break it down to understand what about the use people valued. So no, we didn't ask that question. We have asked that question in the context of ABL Shares Space, and which may or may not be in the slide, but we can talk about that. We didn't ask that question specifically here. We really broke it down. However, also we had open-ended responses in this survey, and I definitely want to make sure I provided a link. And so once you get the slides, it would be great to see what other insights we did learn through these questions.
And Bill Loftus asked, was there a question in here about using public space as a way to create closer proximity to multimodal access? And Bill, can you give us an example just so that everybody's that listening knows exactly what you're talking about?
Well, I was just thinking that we need a lot of accessibility to all the various multimodal paths, if you will, right? So we've got a constrained amount of public space, which means if we want more access, then we have to reserve some of it for multimodal access. So that was the idea. that I had with that question.
Okay, thanks. I think that's kind of it's a similar answer as we focused in the survey on really specific uses so we could better understand how things were stacking up against each other. But what I think is where we're going is that you guys are creating great questions, like Dana said, for our next survey. Andrew Fletcher first.
Yeah, just to add to what Dana was saying about the focus of the public space management group. Really, I think because we're coming off the downtown commission, we're making we sort of drew our focus to how you're using downtown after you get there, and a lot of that is going to take place on the sidewalks and on the sort of the non-vehicular portions of the public space. And I think that was appropriate because we were coming from downtown commission. And I think that also highlights the need for these two groups to work together on the bigger questions about how do you get downtown? Where do you put your bike? Where do you put your car? How do you get around? And to stack on top of the work that we've done at public space management. So I think those are good questions and a great reason why we're all in the same meeting together.
Randy.
Yeah, so I understand that, Andrew, and thanks for that explanation. I just want to make sure that I think from Multimodal's perspective, the way we look at it is that you're missing a big part of the picture, because streets, the vehicles they're using, is public space. And we shouldn't just think about sidewalks. That's where people are supposed to be, because people are in the streets already, whether they're in a vehicle, on their foot, on a bike, in a wheelchair, whatever. They're in the streets. And so that's public space. And it seems like you cut all that out with the survey. You only looked at sidewalks, which you're restricting, saying people should only be in sidewalks, but they aren't. They're all over the place. So just the mindset of the whole thing, we want to make sure that you're understanding that streets aren't off limits, and right now people are using those streets, today, and they're at jeopardy a lot of times in using those streets because of the way they're structured. And so that's downtown open space that needs to be safe for everybody. And so we just want to make sure you're thinking in that way. And every time you talk about downtown open space, streets are part of that, and so if we pack them with cars, if we make them dangerous, that affects the sidewalks a lot. If we make them so they're friendly for people to be on, that affects downtown a lot too. So we just want to make sure that you understand that.
I think it's understood. Dana, you want to comment?
I did just want to comment that I do feel, and it's hard to know, exactly how things get interpreted. And right now we see push carts on sidewalks, right? But I do think the way that the survey was approached, or at least the way the group wanted to be thinking about it, is that it is streets and sidewalks. So I don't think that that it was intended to be specific only to sidewalks. Streets can be repurposed absolutely for any of these things. So I think that was part of the intent, but definitely hear your point moving forward.
So this is Michael Stratton. So did you mention there's going to be another survey?
If you guys want to do one.
Right.
Well, yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense, because I really do feel we missed an opportunity, and not intentionally, maybe there was just not enough voices part of the conversation when putting that initial survey together. But, if we're going to go, let's say, ask a big ask from city council about redefining spaces downtown, I don't know what we can pull out of this original survey that would have made the case for a pedestrian street. So moving forward, if we have another one, I'd like to be really explicit with that and make sure that the public has a very explicit question and ability to weigh in to say, yes, we value this or we don't value that, because otherwise we're just going to hear what the businesses have to tell us. And more often than not, the businesses are going to say, don't close my street. I need that parking in front of me. And that's not always the whole picture.
Maggie?
You're muted, Maggie.
How about now? Can you hear me growl in frustration? I guess I was saying that I guess I'm eager to hear and look at the actual framework, because my understanding is this survey is a precursor to the synthesis and analysis you did, which then resulted in the framework. So we might want another survey, we might not. You know, some of the things that I've seen from the data, I think really lend itself to the goals that a subgroup that was from cross commission talked about, of putting pedestrians first as priority one and cars as the last priority. So I'm eager to hear that type of stuff, because we might actually be further along than we think before knowing that we need to survey again.
What a great point. So there, as Dana was mentioning, it's not insurmountable to get through the document. It's not huge, but there is a lot of information in it. And just as a reminder, it is a living document, and it really is a guide that staff wants to be able to be using to make decisions. We didn't have anything before this, so it's a start, and I love where you're all going. I think it shows that probably staff and you all are thinking similarly. You're just wanting things very quickly, and we're ready to do the move to the next section, I think, Dana. Okay.
Right.
And we were actually pretty good on time.
Great.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Dana's gonna, well, a few people are gonna talk during this, and I hope that each one of staff just briefly introduces themselves, because not everyone knows each other and what they do in the city. So Dana's gonna start off, I believe, right, Dana? You starting off on this one? Great. To get into the meat of the program itself, and keep your ears out. You should be hearing challenges throughout these, and those are important because those are the issues that we need to solve together as a community. There'll be some specific focus on that, but they should be shared throughout. Dana?
All right, so ABL shares space. I think most of you know generally what we're talking about. We're talking about the programs that we launched during COVID to really specifically allow businesses and organizations to utilize outdoor spaces a little bit more flexibly in order to operate safely, and in order for the public and customers to have safer access to goods and services. And we launched a number of different initiatives. We're going to talk about the first 4 on here. We're going to dig in, well, really just the second, third, and fourth. Public sidewalks, parklets, and shared streets we're going to dig more into, but we also allowed businesses to expand into parking lots on private property. You've seen those on Haywood Road, Merriman Avenue, places like that. We introduced curbside pickup zones downtown and in West Asheville. And we also launched a few different equity markets where we sponsored Black and brown vendors to set up at existing events, but we sponsored the ability for them to be able to have a presence in those spaces. And our approach, so we organized an interdepartmental team in the spring of 2020. We were getting a lot of ideas from the public, and we knew we needed to act quickly. We knew there were opportunities to repurpose streets and sidewalks and public spaces. So we formed a team and we established some guiding principles, which we'll pull up in a second. We established several working teams actually to take on different elements of these programs. We worked really closely with public health officials, business organizations, and we started engaging very directly with the downtown community to understand, in this dense environment, what their needs were to be safe, and to understand how the public could be safe in these spaces and accessing these services. And I'll put these guiding principles up because there's different directions to go when it comes to utilizing public space, certainly. But where we landed initially with launching this work is, again, really being able to support public safety, access to goods and services, and to support our local economy to continue to operate. And so just a timeline, and to note that we've extended these programs several times now. Let's see. First, we aligned with the local emergency order. Then we decided to push things a bit further. We have stopped receiving new applications for parklets. We stopped with the elevated parklets first, but we know that we need to work on a long-term program. There's a lot that goes into reviewing those and managing those, which we will talk more about. And I just wanted to note, since we're not going to get into it anywhere else, even though we're going to get into all the other fun stuff, we're working with businesses who have expanded on private property, those in private parking lots. We're currently working with them to see if we can find paths towards permanency for them. So our DSD staff is working individually on a permitting process. And I just wanted to let Chris Collins from our Development Services Department just give us a couple minutes of an update on that particular program.
Hey, thanks, Dana. And it probably won't even last a couple of minutes, but since it's not our main focus today, we do have several businesses that have expanded into their private areas, parking areas, landscape areas. Only a couple of those downtown, really. A few of them downtown, because there's so much public space downtown. But the approach we're taking with them right now is we've sent out a form. We've asked them to submit to us to transition to permanency, because that's going to be the hard part of it. This is going from that leniency of expansion during the first part of the pandemic into where we are now and getting folks properly permitted. So we're getting information about what they're doing out there, contacting each one of them individually once they fill out the form, and kind of coming up with a personalized road to permanency for each business, so we can get them in that permitting process. And hopefully that's going to be successful. So far, we had a nice push of them. We had about 11 or 12 folks fill out the form in the first week, and then it slowed down. So we're going to have to keep pushing that back out. But hopefully it's a model for how we'll work with folks as we come up with other ways for public space to transition or whatever happens there, just to help guide our folks out of this temporary nature and temporary condition.
Thank you, Chris. All right, and so just to note, the participation that we've had in these temporary programs, almost 100 businesses have participated. About half of those, a little more than half, are utilizing private property. So even though maybe the parklets and the shared streets are something that I think is particularly interesting to this group, more of what we've seen, and a lot of businesses have benefited from using those private lots. We will also note that we opened this up, I think, as flexibly as we could for any organization to be able to use outdoor space. We've seen and we've heard feedback from retailers and others why it doesn't make as much sense for them, but we've really seen that almost all of the folks utilizing this program are restaurants doing outdoor dining. We didn't necessarily expect that, but it's something that we've definitely seen. So we did get business feedback. We learned some other things as well. Our recent survey did ask them about street closures. So hopefully maybe I can dig that up before we're done today. Mostly, in summary, the feedback has been really largely positive. Folks have really appreciated it. It has saved people's businesses. We've been told that countless times, which is incredible. And the public survey. So we did a public survey this past September, and we got really super positive responses. We asked about each different program. It was kind of a long survey, but we really wanted to understand where people are at with each of these. And for the most part, folks were very supportive all around. It encouraged people to access local goods and services, which was really nice to hear. It helped people feel safer. So we really feel like we were able to accomplish the goals that we initially set out to do. And I have a link to the full survey results. So that's a fun one to take a look at as well. With all of that, we're going to dig in now. And I know I've missed some questions, but I'll let Steph figure out the right time for those. We'll start talking about public sidewalks specifically, and we'll hand it over to David.
Hi all, glad you're all here and care so much about our downtown and public spaces. So first I want to thank all of you for volunteering your time. I know it's a valuable resource and the city surely appreciates it. One of the initiatives that we ran through Asheville Shared Space was an expansion of outdoor dining on public sidewalks. As most of you know, we it's not new, and dining on sidewalks is not new to Asheville. So I would say this is probably one of the easier initiatives that we launched because we had existing standards and an existing process in place to move those along. The main standard in which we look at for our permanent program, but also for our temporary program, is that we or the business maintains 6 feet of clear space on that sidewalk. And we saw that in some of the survey results, that clear walking space is an important thing from an ADA perspective. The main changes in which we did with the AVL Share Space program was expedite the process. So it was a 1 to 2 day turnaround. Tried to move them as quick as we possibly could. And we waived all the fees. So that was the main things. Otherwise, the program was largely the same. I think we had about 27 businesses take advantage of that. And I believe the majority, if not all, were outdoor dining, as Dana had said previously. Next slide, Dana. So currently what we're doing is transitioning those folks that are in the temporary program to our permanent program, which means basically they have to apply for an encroachment permit and an outdoor dining permit. So, and there's fees associated with those. Our DSD folks, Chris Collins, who just spoke, is working with those people that are currently involved with Asheville Shared Space and transitioning them now. We took a pause. We thought it was a good time to actually look at our encroachment standards, and especially as it pertains to outdoor dining. So currently our urban design working group that was mentioned earlier is taking a look at those standards. Are they correct? Do they need some tweaking? What is the review process? Could it be better? And then what is our fee structures? Are they correct? And how do we want to look at those things? The challenges and lessons learned, and you'll notice a lot of these challenges will be similar for a number of these initiatives. But the main thing is limited space, as we've heard already. The majority of our sidewalks downtown are actually 8 foot or smaller. Our Unified Development Ordinance requires 10-foot sidewalks in our CBD, our central business district. But the reality is most of our existing streets and existing buildings do not have 10-foot sidewalks. And as we all know, those sidewalks are not just for walking. There's street trees, there's trash receptacles, there's bike racks, there's benches. So, an 8-foot or a 10-foot sidewalk really doesn't have 8 or 10 foot of clear walking space at the end of it. Other concerns or questions that we've looked at is, is privatization of public space, and especially in this particular case, it's free privatization. And that's something that we're trying to balance, I think, and struggling with a little bit, but understanding when is it good, what is the right mix of that. Obviously, if you use it for outdoor dining, it can't be used for some of those other uses. So again, getting down to the balance of uses within our public realm. Seating on both sides, especially during COVID, we've had a number of businesses that would have dining adjacent to their storefront, but then would also have them along the street front. So as a pedestrian, you would essentially feel like you would walk through almost a dining area. And with the social distancing with COVID and so forth, there was some concerns, but there also is just some generalized concerns. Is that a comfortable experience walking through in essentially a dining area? Is it appropriate on all streets? And I think a lot of that comes down to activity of the street and then the width of the sidewalks. Limited enforcement, again, this is something you're going to hear probably a number of times, is just limited resources and enforcement to maintain that 6 foot of clear space. occupancy limits. Some of you may not know, but occupancy limits for restaurants actually do include outdoor dining. When this program was initially started, that's when we had reductions in occupancy ratings, so it wasn't really an issue at that time. But now it's something we're looking at now that restaurants are back up to allowed for full occupancy, and then alcohol sales and just controlling those. Next slide. And these are just some of the images. And I think mainly this is just showing some of the, I guess, concerns or struggles that we have. Outdoor dining is great. Let's just say that. And Dana mentioned a number of reasons why. It activates the streets. I, like a lot of people, love sitting in an outdoor cafe. I think a lot of us enjoy that. But as you can see in a number of these slides, I would say at least half of them probably are not ADA compliant with a pedestrian access route of encroachment into that realm and enforcement. You can see in the one in the upper right-hand corner, that's what we're talking about, where you have dining on both sides. You can see it in the background there. Use of the space, how much is good and how much isn't. Congregation. As you can see, most of our sidewalks, again, if they're 10 feet and you need 6 foot of clear space, that leaves 4 feet basically for outdoor dining on most of our sidewalks. And then on 8 foot sidewalks, you essentially have 2 feet for outdoor dining if there's not trees and so forth in that area. And then just time of use. A number of our restaurants and so forth just aren't open during the day, during the week all the time. So is it an activated space, I guess, in those off hours, and how should those spaces look and act in those times? And again, I think it all boils down to that balance. What is the appropriate balance of the use of public spaces? So I think the next slide is just for some questions.
Let's go ahead and address some of the things that ended up in the chat too while we're transitioning to that. The first one, Joe Archibald says, I presume that move to permanency involves adjusting parking, and are you saying requirements or regulations? Because requirements downtown are...
I was thinking on that, what Chris was talking about with the restaurants expanding into their own space.
Yep. Okay. So yeah, many times, yes, I think Chris has already left, but they are looking at parking requirements all over the city, not just in downtown. Obviously, downtown doesn't have parking requirements except for one use, but yes. And then, Chris is back.
If I could add immediately, though, they're seeing if there's Chris, you're here.
Yeah, Chris, talk about
No,
this, the working with. We're trying to work with everyone.
Yeah, real quick. First off, it's just working within the current regulations and seeing what we can do. And of course, we're looking into whether or not there's going to be a need or a will to change parking requirements.
Right. So that may be forthcoming. And then the next question Andrew is asking Dana, I believe, you may have to explain this. He says, could you briefly characterize the reasons for the 5 parklets that were discontinued?
I think, and absolutely, let's talk about this in the parklet section.
Okay.
But yes, it's a great question.
And parklets are coming up next after we have this feedback session. Maggie?
Okay, so what was really sticking out to me in that presentation is how we kept talking about 6 feet requirements on sidewalks. And I want us to think about all of the public space, because the hardest part of what we are trying to do collaboratively is figure out how to share. But we are only thinking about this amount of space. Meanwhile, there's a whole road that has parking and cars on it. And so I think that a lot of our space constraints change when parking is part of the conversation. And a lot of our competition of public assets and resources change when parking is part of the conversation. And I mean, even almost some of the way the agenda is set up, like bifurcating sidewalks and parklets, like I think that might lead us down a pigeonholed conversation, when I think if we look at it more comprehensively, our solutions might be more comprehensive to get towards the shared goals that we have.
Andrew.
Yeah, I think that I am so much ready to hear, after the experience of the pandemic, people talking about their willingness to give up a parking space. I think that if we were basing our decisions right now on, if we had asked questions in public space management about how to use parking pre-COVID, those answers would be so out of date because we've had a sea change in local understanding about how to use parking. And so I am really glad that we don't have to base that on pre-COVID expectations about parking and things. I think because I have personally seen a much greater willingness to treat parking as a fungible resource that can serve other goals. So I think we are, as a city and as two bodies, and I think meeting together now are really ready to have that conversation in ways that we simply weren't before this moment.
Let's move into, now that everybody's got their juices flowing, let's move into these next questions. So grab your phone or get your tab for the AHA slides ready. Generally speaking, do the benefits of sidewalk dining outweigh the negatives? All right, we're going to go to the next one. That one's pretty clear where we're going with that. Is 6 feet of clear space for a walking path on sidewalks enough? You can answer generally yes, generally no, or it depends on other factors like the width of the sidewalk, other site conditions, etc. I think there's a couple more of you that can chime in. Let's go to the next one, Dana. Should a business be able to have sidewalk seating on both sides of the clear walking path where space allows? In other words, along the curb and alongside a building. Okay, these last two have had some good depends. So those are areas to dive into. Should a business be allowed to have both the parklet and sidewalk dining? Okay, that's the most split. Now we're talking about fees. Should the permit fee be based in part on the amount of space the business gets to use? And if any of these questions are really making you feel strongly like, oh my gosh, I wish I could defend my answer, please write down what question it is and what your answer was so that we want to know what those ones were that really kind of made you feel strong and passionate about this. Go to the next one. Should permitting options or standards encourage businesses to remove their items from the sidewalk when they're not in use? Okay. Generally speaking. Oh, is that the next one, Dana?
That's the next
Oh,
one.
we're going to hold that. That was a sneak peek. We're going to hold that next one. Okay. And thank you, Joe, for your comments in there. I'll be sure to get them. We're going to move to the next part of our presentation. I believe Jessica is going to be helping us talk about parklets specifically.
Woohoo. We could open up for a little discussion on the sidewalk piece if folks want.
Oh, yeah. Let's do that.
Pose a question, Dana.
So who, if people had strong feelings, as Steph asked, about any particular questions that we'd asked and want to kind of chime in a little bit, I think now's a time to hit some of those highlights.
Ruth was first.
Yeah, I just wanted basically to make a comment. I know that there are a few places in the city where there are either cooperative agreements or there are easements with restaurants. And I think also with parklets, it was especially with the last question, when you said, should everything be removed when the restaurant is closed? The biggest problem is a restaurant, if they have a parklet, they've gone out and they've purchased, most likely they've purchased new furniture, they've bought heating units, whatever, and the restaurant isn't going to be large enough to store all of that. And I think it puts a burden on the restaurant that they have to remove everything off the street. So I just wanted to make that comment.
Andrew.
Yeah, I'd just like to note that so many of these questions are, it depends. And I think if you look at our survey results with all the competing possible interests, they're not all competing. A lot of them actually only work with others. So for instance, busking, when you get busking paired correctly with the right outdoor dining experience, those two things are really, they need to be together to work. And so these things are not always in opposition. Sometimes one needs the other. But I would say one thing about if we're going to be privatizing public space, there has to be a public benefit to it. If the only benefit that can be identified from privatizing public space is to that particular business, then I think that is not an appropriate use. So there has to be some shared success when we make the decision to privatize something that belongs to the public. We have to make sure that there's shared success, and it's not just a handout to one particular business.
Jessica Morris has her hand up.
I do. So I was really intrigued by the responses to the question about should a business be allowed to have sidewalk dining and a parklet? And we'll talk about parklets in a second, but kind of going along the same lines as Andrew with privatization of public space, it's interesting that so many of you said yes very quickly, that doesn't seem to be a concern, that they're taking more and more space, parking and sidewalk. Does anybody want to elaborate on that?
No, not really. Of those doors, I think you take them right to.
Anyone who answered yes on that?
I can just speak for myself, a lot of these times it just depends on where they are and what they're doing. So downstairs here on Church Street, do they have room for a couple little tables, and then they need a little parklet? Possibly, Smoky Mountain Brewery might need. So it really depends on the site conditions on the sidewalk. If they have room for just a couple little two tops on the sidewalk, but then they have a little parklet that's you can walk between and get to, and they've got some four tops. So sometimes it would just really depend on. We have so many little nooks and crannies and niches in Asheville that I think I'm saying, oh, you can't have both would be that would be unwise.
I think too that the way the parklet used is important, and so it's kind of a case-by-case basis. But if the parklet makes the street more inviting, because the way the parklet's used, if it's not just packed with seats, but if it's packed with some kind of environmental conditions that make it feel more comfortable to walk on the street then, or walk through the parking, let's walk through the sidewalk area there, that's going to be something of much more value than just having the tables crammed onto the sidewalk and not have just a 6 foot of space maybe too. So if it kind of has to be evaluated, I think, in order to see how best it can be used. But in many cases, I think the more we can make the whole area comfortable, the better. And sometimes that would be having both the parklet and the sidewalk dining being used.
Michael.
Yeah, I would just say that if we're not going to open up the street to allow pedestrians to spill into the street, then I don't think it's appropriate to have a private business take over the sidewalk and a parking space. It just seems like we'd be giving a lot up to private businesses at that point, and we're taking that away from the pedestrians and bottlenecking them into even less space than they already had. We're not known for very wide sidewalks in Asheville, as was indicated. So I think the opening up the parklets is great if you want a restaurant to be able to expand, but I don't think it should be able to expand at the expense of a pedestrian.
Patricia.
I think the more you can get people using the street as a parklet, whether they're dining or sitting or having a comfortable experience, and they're not walking along a car parked, I think it's great. I would say use every space you can, and pushing out into the street sounds like a great idea to me. You've taken over that space from the cars for people, and whether it's used as a parklet or the restaurant, I see the restaurants as being a lot more come and go, and a parklet being more permanent. So you've claimed the space, and if the restaurant's not using it, then why can't anybody come and sit down there? I think the open space is great.
Stephen Lee. Might be muted. You're muted, Stephen Lee.
I'd like to speak in favor of what Patricia just mentioned and several others, in that I think that maybe there's a limit on the number of spaces. I guess now it may be 2, but I think that walking between, as a pedestrian, walking between outdoor dining on both sides is actually really nice. And, if we lose 2 parking spaces, I mean, we've lost 2 parking spaces. And, but I think that the benefit of citizens and visitors by seeing people outside enjoying being in town is much better. The more people on the streets, the better. Thanks.
This has been good. So Jessica, you want to dive in now?
Yeah, I think this is a really good transition. So I'm going to talk a little bit about parklets specifically, but we obviously see how all of these things relate and bleed into each other. So we put in place this temporary parklet program as part of the Asheville shared space, and really in response to COVID, although parklets and streeteries, which a lot of people call them when they're specific to outdoor dining, is something that a lot of cities have been doing for quite some time, but hadn't yet hit Asheville. So we rolled this out relatively quickly, looking at standards that those other cities that came before us had put in place and used those as some guidelines for our own program here. And generally speaking, the parklets that you see in downtown right now are between 1 and 3 spaces and typically right in front of the storefront. And but some folks did use them for other things besides outdoor dining. There was some opportunity for queuing. We saw a lot of that, especially early in the pandemic. And merchandise and or other programming was also allowed, but we didn't really see that use. We did have options for elevated parklets or an at-grade parklet. So the parklets that you see in those 2 bottom left corners, those are considered to be at grade. So they, I'm sorry, the one on the bottom left corner is an at grade. So it's in the street. It's not at grade with the sidewalk. Whereas I think the one in the second picture from the left is at grade, but I could be wrong. So, I mean, elevated. So an elevated parklet is typically more robust in terms of a structure, that someone has built a platform that makes it level with the sidewalk. So there's a little more expense, a little more time that goes into it, and it's obviously more difficult to move if needed. We did not have any parklets on DOT streets because DOT does not allow it. So that's a constraint that we have. And so really all we have control over are our city streets. So Biltmore Avenue, for example, is a DOT street. So that is a constraint that we have to live within. Next slide, please. So right now we are allowing existing parklets to remain through June of next year. And where we want to go with this is to seek funding through the budget process to develop a more long-term permanent program, because we, don't really want to fly by the seat of our pants anymore. Not that we have been completely, but we want to make sure that if we do implement a permanent program, that we have some more resources in place to make sure that they meet the rules and the regulations, and that they are, well built, ADA accessible, et cetera, and that there's enforcement in place just in case things get a little messy. So challenges and lessons learned, similar, many of them, to what we learned with outdoor dining. ADA accessibility is definitely one of the biggest issues. A streetery or a parklet needs to be accessible. And so how do you do that, especially if it's an at grade and it isn't built on a platform? Another thing that is a big question for us is, what happens if the business isn't open? Do we let the thing stay there in the street and just be empty? Or should there be some other requirement for that? Another thing that can cause some issues is, what if the parking spaces don't really line up with the business frontage? So what if they've got a bulb out and a tree in front of their business and no actual parking space right in front of their business? So how do we treat them? Do they get a parking space even though it might not be in their frontage? And then as everyone's mentioned, there's multiple departments that are involved in this. It's not like somebody just submits an application and they put a bunch of tables out. Particularly in the winter, we had a lot of folks that wanted to do heaters. There's still requirements for fire and occupancy and transportation safety in particular. We want to make sure that whatever gets put in the street is going to be safe for the folks that might be using that parklet. So there's a lot of review that went into these temporary programs. Stormwater and street cleaning and all of those maintenance items become more complicated, and is something that has to be part of an ongoing program. And then, of course, utility conflicts, loss of parking revenue, which is incremental with each one of these, and does have an impact. to our finances. And then limited enforcement and inspections, that's an ongoing issue that we have. Next slide, please. So here's some photos. You see a lot of the success photos, but this is what might be considered not success, which is empty parklets that are just kind of hanging out with nothing going on. The top left picture shows the storage issue that Ruth was speaking to. So they got to store things somewhere, but they most likely are not going to have room inside their business to do that. And then the empty parklets that you see outside of Green Man, and I think that's the Vault maybe. And then another thing that we were dealing with and trying to figure out is the tents and the blockage of visibility. The aesthetics maybe aren't the best. So moving forward, what do we want this to look like? Next slide, please. All right, here's some more thought-provoking questions for you guys, and there are no wrong answers. Dana, do you want to go through those questions, or Stephanie?
Yeah, they're coming up. Generally,
Okay.
yeah. So this one, a lot of people already got to it. Generally speaking, should public parking spaces be able to be privatized for dining? Dinery is what I'm going to call it now. Okay, a lot of leaning toward the fees. If streeteries are allowed long-term, we are considering treating them differently than public parklets in terms of regulations and fees. Does that make sense? And if the folks saying not sure, if that is because you need more information, let us know in the chat. That would be good. Should there be a cap or limit to how many parklets or streeteries are allowed downtown?
Let me answer Joe's question real quick. So when we say a difference between a parklet and a streetery, so a parklet was originally, I guess, invented, if you will, as a public park, and well, at least in the United States, the concept, I guess. An area for the public that a business is not privately benefiting from. So anybody could sit in the parklet and read a book or play chess or whatever. Whereas a streetery is typically a privately managed space that a business benefits from. And going to Dane's question, so the Center for Craft does have approval from DOT for a parklet. I should have been more specific. The state does not allow outdoor dining next to a travel lane. So they would not allow an outdoor dining cafe or a streetery, but they did allow a parklet. It was a weird nuance in the state statute.
Maggie, to your point, maybe I'm misunderstanding, but also just to build on what Jessica said, where we've seen parklets, I think in other cities, a business might benefit, but the space isn't commercialized. So generally, a space would still be managed and maintained by a private business, not necessarily by the city. Maybe in some cases it's sponsored by the city, but say there's a coffee shop and folks who get coffee in paper cups can go use that space, but so can someone who has their own coffee who wants to go read a paper or have a snack. So that's the way I think we've typically seen parklets operate prior to COVID. Again, so just not commercialized fully.
It almost sounds like you're saying like public or private. Like if I'm Maggie Brewery and I want a streetery and Randy wants to come sit down, I might be able to say, no, that's seating for my restaurant. But if I'm a coffee shop, it's public use. So maybe that distinction might help, because I think we're sifting into a breakdown that was just unclear of like, is this generally public access? Then I would have answered that question differently.
So I think it is important for staff, and I don't need to answer this, but to explain, to be specific about the parklets that we have in downtown Asheville right now. So for instance, there is one parklet that hopefully you all have seen. The city partnered with the AIA to do parking day last year. And one of the parklets is basically it is a public parklet on Market Street. And the Center for Crafts parklet is going to be a public parklet. But right now, I think all of the parklets that we have are privatized. They are seating for outdoor dining. Is that correct?
Quasi with the South Market Street parklet that Leaf tends to use more than anyone else.
We have like an owner who has the ability to program it.
But even for that parklet and for the Center for Craft parklet, we have entities that maintain those spaces, and that to me is consistent across cities in terms of having a private partnership, even when it's public space. And I think these weeds are important for us too, because
in a public parklet, you can't tell someone they have to leave. It's basically like the sidewalk at that point. So in a streetery or an outdoor dining, the idea is that has been privatized space, and that a restaurant or a business can, if you're not there to be a patron, then you can be asked to leave. That's kind of a big distinction between the two.
Yeah, and to build off of, I think, Steph's question, currently what's out there today are, they are not publicly accessible parklets with the exception of the one on Market Street. So it is for the use of the business. Now, mind you, this was a COVID response program that we're looking at trying to, and that's why these answers and discussion, I think, is very important. Should they be publicly accessible when not in use by a restaurant? Currently, the way that the temporary ones are on the street today are not publicly accessible. They are basically controlled and used by the entity in which applied for that parklet. And again, it was a COVID response, so there was a little bit different rationales behind doing that, but I think that is. And there are municipalities that there have hybrids. I think to Andrew's point, some other people's point, cities like San Francisco allow for streeteries, but they have to be publicly accessible in the times in which the restaurant is not using those parklets. And then there's other municipalities where streeteries are basically private spaces to the patrons of that business. And I think that's something that we're trying to figure out how to use that as we move forward and look at more permanent standards. What should that look like and what should the balance be? And I think one of the outcomes of that is also going to kind of determine, quite frankly, the demand we're going to have in our city for parklets, depending on the answer of that question potentially.
I just want to catch up with a few of the things. We did have a note to try to not comment in the chat section. That's going to be for questions. So I want to read some for transparency's sake. Dean noted that what we're talking about, that things have to be removable in order. I'm not sure, Dean, what you're saying there. I guess in order for it to not be used by the public, because that is a question, as we've said. Hey, if you have tables and chairs out there, why not just leave them out there for the public during the day if you're not open? Dane, can you elaborate on your comment?
Yeah, I was specifically talking about the Center for Craft parklet.
Okay.
So on a DOT street, they require that it has to be removable. So that was part of the design consideration when they did that parklet, or when they are doing that parklet currently, is it has to be easily removable for maintenance.
Thank you. Michael noted that in many cities around the world, the city often installs sunshades above entire streets to keep them cool in the summer, and this could minimize the need for tents. Joe commented that I think that becomes when the business is open and when it's not, back to the public benefit Andrew mentioned earlier. And Maggie said, I like reverting to public use when business isn't open, and Jane says DOT requires that. So we have a hands up. Andrew is first.
I'm gonna take a stab at establishing a possible criteria, and that if you are going to be maintaining for commercial and exclusive use a public space, you may need to do that for hospitality and or legal reasons, serving alcohol, for instance. You may have to maintain a legal and an exclusive space where customers are not allowed, or sorry, non-customers are not allowed. But when the business is closed, I think that it should revert to public space, absolutely. And that is part of what could be determined as a public benefit. And it should be ready for public use after that, which may mean, if not full clearance of some items there, at least it should be ready for public use. But I think as far as where fees should come in, I think if you are going to maintain an exclusive environment for just your customers in what was formerly public space, then absolutely there should be fees involved. And the focus should always be on establishing a public benefit from public space.
Michael.
Yeah, I mean, I was almost going to verbatim repeat what he just said. I would imagine that there probably should just be a different fee structure for the usage. So if you're going to exclusively use the space for private business, let's say 80% of the time it's for private business, then you're going to, I would imagine, pay a different fee than if you're only using it half the time or a quarter of the time or something like that. But I'm definitely on board for the idea that when it's not being used for private business, that it should by default be opened up to the public. And then the other thought I had was there's a few of these around town, and my wife and I are often walk downtown, and we have a cup of coffee. We've got our kid in the stroller, and we think, oh, well, maybe we could, have our coffee here, but it's not clear. So it'd be nice to have really good signage to explain what's a public space and what's a private space, and that distinction, especially if they're going to go back and forth.
Brian.
To address the issue that how opaque should the thing be? If it's got walls on it, then it's a building, and it's not a parklet, it's not an eatery, and we're not doing architecture out in the public space.
Gio?
I was going to make a comment about allowing the dining area to become a public space. And it's just a point. But if a restaurant just has IKEA tables and chairs out there, they're not going to last that long if they're allowed to become public, when they're closed up. So I think some kind of standard for durability or be able to, something to consider, because if we want to encourage it and people want to use flimsy little chairs, there's also a safety issue involved. Those are things that have to be considered as part of, sort of the design of these things. So I just wanted to put it out there.
Okay. Patricia, let's get your comment in, and then we're going to go back to questions.
Just real quick, places like in New York City, in Times Squares, where they have painted streets and turned them into parklets, there is a standard, I call it a Bryant Park furniture style, that's very light, very movable, and that could be the standard for any of the public parklets, and it would become the vocabulary that those are public places to sit, and they're very movable. They could end up at another parklet, but it would be the standard for this place is open to the public. And if a business wants to let their place be open to the public after hours, then they could choose to use that vernacular furniture.
Robin did have her hand up.
I did, and then I took it down. But I was going to speak to the fact that if they're really light and movable, then how does a restaurant guarantee that they're going to be there when they open the next day? That seems problematic to me. If I were running a business, I would want to make sure my tables were there.
All right, so we are 50-50 on should there be a cap on how many per parklets or streeters are allowed on a street. So, Ruth, we're going to hear from you, and then I'm going to ask somebody else to chime in on this question over here that we are divided on. Ruth?
Yeah, I'm basically basing this on outdoor dining at the Grove Arcade, but usually a restaurant, if they're going to have outside dining, they're going to invest in some pretty substantial furniture. And most people chain that furniture at night. They chain it together through the legs and the table so it can't be stolen. I think we're all mixing up what had to be done because of COVID and all of the picnic tables that we have everywhere. And, you know, I would hope if we go forward that maybe we look at some kind of, furniture guidelines for restaurants that are going to continue to use parklets if that's what we decide to do. But, most restaurants are going to be pretty responsible because it's their image, it's their business. So I just wanted to point that out.
Okay, did anybody feel really strongly about this question, especially if you answered no? Anybody want to provide a comment before we move to the next? Does every business that wants a parklet get one, even if adjacent neighbors are not supportive?
And I'll just note, since it didn't come up, we did ask those participating in the temporary program to get the okay from their neighbors. So that was part of our process.
So I'm guessing that people who answered not sure are probably on a it depends. That's probably similar to that. Let's go to the next one. How big should these be? How many parking spaces? Up to 2 spaces per business? Up to 3 spaces per business or parklet? Or should they only be allowed to use a parking that's directly adjacent to the business frontage? Obviously, you can see where we're going here with some of the challenges that we have experienced. And going back to what Dana said earlier is that basically, we had anticipated the beginning of this that perhaps people were going to be innovative and start using parklets for other uses, or we would see, kind of innovative vending, but we really saw this associated with dining. And so we had a lot of different types of streets where some people weren't going to do it at all. Some people really wanted to do it, but if we were just going to allow them to do it adjacent to their business frontage, they will only get 1 space. And the way our standards run, you really can't build a parklet in 1 space. So that's something to consider. And Maggie's going to give us a comment or question. Maggie may have actually dropped off the call accidentally.
I think, can you hear me now? Yeah, I'm having a mute issue. My first thought was like, it makes sense to do it directly in front of their business. It definitely doesn't make sense to creep onto my neighbor's storefront. But I ended up telling up to 2 or 3 spaces, because if I'm a small business and it's hard enough for me to get storefront, like I guess if we allow it to be correlated to their existing business storefront, that rewards our bigger businesses and our folks who are able to like already have a lot of resource, and that for our smaller businesses it would kind of give them less storefront, and so that feels like a little bit unfair. So I feel like a capped amount might have a better equitable outcome.
Joe.
It's interesting. I'm sitting here kind of pondering what Maggie just said, because I responded, only adjacent to business frontage, thinking, I think one of those images you showed, if I'm not mistaken, was a place downtown that actually is on a corner. So it would seem like if you're on a corner, you could have, if you're directly adjacent, it depends upon what frontage you want to say, but if you can choose a frontage, let's call it, you could have 1 space or you could have 3 spaces. I do think Maggie has hit on something though, as far as what would be equitable. So if a business only has 1 space, is it that it's directly adjacent to business frontage, minimum of 2? Like, is there some variability, if that makes sense?
Michael.
So initially, I thought it definitely makes sense to have the parking, have it right in front of the business. But then I started thinking, this is still public space. If we treat it as if it belongs to that individual business, is that appropriate? What if you've got somebody that doesn't own a business downtown, but they want to, create a public parklet? I'm not saying I know of anybody that wants to do that, but just making the assumption that this space belongs to that particular business, and that might not be a great concept. It's just food for thought.
Theo.
Just to back up on that too, I can see where if part of the process would be if to offer or have them open. So, but if there's no other competition for those spaces, and if someone wants to take care of those spaces and manage those spaces, I would say let them have up to 3. Why not? I could see instances where that could be a benefit to the public.
Andrew.
So I want to go back to the confluence of successes that can be achieved. And so, I mean, let's say that you own a retail shop next to a lunch spot. It might be really nice if you had a bunch of customers looking in your window for the duration of their lunch. That might be a shared success between those two. And I'd hate to write a rule that boxes out that type of thing. So that's why I chose up to 3 spaces per business, because I think there's more chances for shared success in those places. I think I'm going to highlight something that I think identifies a problem with one of the particular aspect of the problem with one of our problem locations that we showed earlier, and that is the eatery, the streetery does not face the main ingress and egress way of that restaurant. And so I think that we should maintain, like, it has to be to the front of the business, or it has to face a main ingress and egress way to that business. I think that's kind of why we have that alienated spot that doesn't feel like it's connected to the rest of the streetscape and the business.
Dina.
I maybe will continue with the questions, but I feel like I've heard so many themes, and I want to touch on the question that Andrew had initially asked about the parklets that had decided to discontinue. Most of those actually are on Banks Avenue. There's no longer any in place there. We had come in proactively and helped them get set up. And the feedback we heard, we didn't hear from each individual business or manager, but it's about maintenance of materials. It was about conflicts with neighbors. And where we also had parklets dismantled, I know that that conflicts with neighbors was an issue. We have heard some feedback from retailers that frontage and visibility is really important for any business, but I know for retail businesses, and if another business is blocking that, we've heard some negative comments on that. Staffing has been a challenge. I think less so for the restaurants, but we've definitely heard from the retailers. But yeah, those who have discontinued, the themes and the feedback we heard was about maintenance and management of the street generally, where I think what we heard is there would be support if there was a long-term design and configuration and construction that supported that. But I think there's a lot of challenges with keeping up the configuration short-term and the cost of that, which is real for those businesses.
Can we move on to shared streets now? Which is our last section before wrapping up.
Let me make sure we have.
Oh, we have more
one
questions?
or two more questions.
Excellent. Okay, this one is free for all. You get to put it in. Are there any streets, blocks, or areas that aren't suitable for parklets or streeteries? If so, where? Church Street is an interesting answer, in my opinion.
Same for Haywood Street. Why not?
Yeah, I want to hear some of this.
Yeah, we had one on Church Street.
We did have one on Church Street, and we also, for folks who don't know, have a lot of interest from a group on that street, a shared neighborhood group, to actually turn that into a pedestrian first shared street at some point.
I got a church at Central Methodist. I'm gonna say yes on that. We agree.
You're one of the tribe. Yeah, decisions should be more granular, site specific. That's exactly why we're asking. This is one of those tasks where we would basically need to go through all of the CBD and determine where it might not be appropriate based on some of these comments here. Sidewalk, narrow sidewalk.
Or otherwise staff is making one-off decisions in every case. And is staff, is that appropriate to do? This is why this is so fun. Thank you, guys.
I like this. Areas that block existing landmarks or long-standing art. Interesting, long-standing art. Oh, and we can't see that picture of where this happens, unfortunately. But it looks like there might be a good illustration. Let's go ahead and see what Joe Archibald has to say.
What the comment you just made, Stephanie, was kind of why I put it as, those things need to be taken into account. If you've got a really, the instance I put, if you have a really narrow sidewalk, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't be able to have a parklet or a streetery. It's just that you need to allow, that's a location where you couldn't also have something on the sidewalk. You need to allow for better pedestrian, or at least not limiting any further the pedestrian movement through there. So again, it is very much that getting into the weeds on each specific spot, unfortunately. And how do you write the rules around it for that becomes hard.
Thank you for recognizing that, Joe. Andrew?
Yeah, I'd like to say that. I mean, I know it's staff work to do site by site, but it'd also be a lot of staff work to go to do a city-wide, to like look at all these different streets and how a street changes drastically from one place to another. You've got places where a new development has put in a 10-foot sidewalk, and then just down the way, there's that same street has a 6-foot sidewalk. So I think that what we're doing here is establishing some criteria. Is we should make the criteria paramount over a sort of blanket approach to certain streets. If the criteria make sense that we've established here, I think these are well thought out, and pulling a map out and saying this good, this bad is probably not the right approach. We'd miss a lot of opportunities if we did it that way, I think.
Couple comments coming in. Places like long waiting lines already forcing pedestrians into traffic lanes, like Old Europe. Yep, we've seen that in a lot of places. And then Sage says, winter always reminds me of the areas that make for great public space that we can't see until it snows and shows what's not driven through. Let's do the next question. And Anna, why don't you, while people are answering, Anna, why don't you do your comment or question?
Great, thanks. I got bumped out for a little while back, maybe a half hour or so ago, so I apologize if this was already covered, but I was curious to hear from you all about the perception from emergency response, and if there's been any sort of issue or any criteria that we might need to consider regarding emergency response vehicles.
Yeah, the answer is yes. Jessica, do you want to take that?
I can try. David might need to back me up on the specifics, but I would say fire, but not so much in the response. It's more along the lines of we can't have something in front of a FDC, which is a fire department connection, which if you've never seen one of those, they're on buildings all over the place. And it's basically where they hook up the hose, I think, to the building to get water in the event of a fire. So and obviously fire hydrants is another thing. And those are all over the place and will be a very significant constraint moving forward. And then there's another requirement that I can't remember exactly about separation between parklets for access for fire and tents also. They wanted separation, I want to say, of 5 feet, I think, between tents. So that's another constraint. And then in terms of access, the lane width was also a constraint with fire. Maintaining, I think, a minimum of 14 feet was what we kind of landed on with them. So, for example, on South Market Street, there was a lot of conversation about maintaining a certain width as well as Wall Street. So, yeah, all of those weigh in, and fire was a huge part and continues to still be a part of the review process for all of these. 18 feet was Banks and Buxton because that was a two-way street. They wanted 18 feet. And also it was anything that's like a major fire route, they pay particular attention to.
The fire department also knows very well where they have to fight fires for certain buildings. So we had some considerations on Wall Street that were really important to make to be able to access buildings. It couldn't be accessed from Patton, but yeah, it's a huge part. And I'll just look at the comments real quick and say Ben Woody, our development services director, chimed in that the fire marshal's office participated with a core staff group in developing any of our program and meeting on a regular basis. So Andrew Fletcher's question is, what's the difference between you have a parked car in the way of it's FTC versus a parklet or streetery? And I don't think there is one. Is that correct, Jessica? We don't allow, these are usually areas that are marked, like when you see the little red lines marked, kind of, you can't get in front of an FTC or a And the other thing is,
Yeah,
could be
just
tucked out of the way.
my understanding, and the fire department, there's a lot of FDCs now. Some of them are marked, some aren't, but we're heading in the direction of making sure that those spaces are clear.
Absolutely. So the question was, should we require that parklets or streeteries be open to the public during times when the business isn't open? And after a lot of discussion, it looks like the majority of you are saying yes. Some are saying no. What features or characteristics do you think should be part of a shared street? So you get to fill in 3 there.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Oh, we didn't do shared streets. I'm just reading them. Jessica, this is going to be you? Who's going to
Yeah, I think so.
Fantastic.
I think so, yeah. So shared streets. So we did do a few, not as many as I think some of my folks on the multimodal wanted to see, but we wanted to make sure that we were coordinating very closely with businesses during this time, because again, going back to our guidelines and our guiding principles when we first put all this stuff together, was really related to COVID. We didn't want to make things worse for any of our businesses that were already struggling. So everything that we implemented in partnership and with very close communication with the businesses on that street. And essentially, we didn't shut any streets down. We tried to make them more pedestrian priority. And in most cases, we expanded into the parking that happened to be there. In some cases, we reduced the vehicular travel lane or rerouted. And again, we put in some pedestrian priority zone signage. So we had several examples. South Market, we had a shared street. We had one on, was it Buxton or Banks or both? I guess it was both. And then, of course, Wall Street, which is probably the one street downtown that is already conducive to that kind of treatment. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we did learn, which Andrew touched on earlier, is that I do think there's been a sea change in the thought of, in some of the business owners' perspective about the value of the parking on the street in front of their business. And Wall Street is a perfect example of that. Dana can attest to the years and years and years of conversations with Wall Street businesses about the parking on Wall Street and could we get rid of it? And in pre-COVID times, it was very, very split. And I think most of them did not want to lose that parking. And that's changed. That sentiment has changed. And we are implementing, in cooperation with the Wall Street owners, a long-term shared street there. And they are putting their wallets behind it, and they're investing in the furnishings and fencing, if you will, to make that both aesthetically pleasing, but also safe and durable. And so I think you're right, Andrew, that there's some differences between now and then. And I think a lot of us are seeing that. Challenges and lessons learned. Again, staff time and resources to design, coordinate, and manage. With the shared streets in particular, we have to be very careful about how we implement them and making sure that we don't do any businesses any damage, especially during this time. Similar to parklets or streeteries, activation is important. So generally speaking, a shared street, you want to have active uses, you want it to be vibrant. You don't really just want it to be empty all the time. So that takes a lot of intentionality and design considerations and engagement with those business owners. delivering city services becomes more of a challenge here, as well as fire access. And again, the changing needs of the businesses and the community throughout the week or during off hours has an impact on that. And of course, enforcement is something for all of these that we struggle with. So these pictures, none of them are here in Asheville, but what we were trying to show is that there is a spectrum, if you will, of what I think if each of you were to say what you think a shared street is, you probably would all have slightly different answers. And so there's a vast spectrum of what a shared street could be or look like. How shared is it? That's kind of the question. So that's just, something that we wanted to throw out there, is that there's different definitions, if you will, for what a shared street is. I think that top left one might be Missoula. That's where I came from before. Anyways, next slide, please. Okay, now we got more questions for you.
Ooh, lots of answers to what features or characteristics do you think should be part of a shared street?
Overhead twinkly lights just make everything better. Those should be everywhere.
Hmm. So for those of you who said no parking, do you mean no ADA accessible parking or loading zones as well? We'll talk more.
Move to the next question. We can always come back to this.
Yeah. Do you think a shared street should allow delivery vehicles and limited local traffic?
I think those are two separate questions.
Yeah, we talked about that. We wondered as well.
I would love to talk about that more.
Agreed.
Delivery vehicles, yes. Local traffic, no.
A lot of our businesses use personal vehicles for their various goods and delivery needs, particularly if it's small vendors and farmers or themselves picking things up. So that is definitely something that we have learned over time working with businesses on these streets.
Can we just give that a title and then add it in with delivery vehicles so that like random Maggie can't just roll up and do it, but Susie, business owner, can?
Yep. Yeah, it could be hang tags or something like that. Enforcement for that is always going to be a challenge, but yes, there are definitely ways.
So Michael Stratton is asking, can the tunnel, and he means Rat Alley, under Wall Street be used for delivery?
No.
No.
But I'm happy to take anybody down there that would like
Ooh.
a tour.
Like me, I want to go. I really, really want to go.
Excellent.
Me too,
Excellent.
man.
Great.
Me too. I've never seen it.
I didn't even know it existed. So yeah.
I've been back there after some shows at Jack of the Wood.
Field trip. Field trip.
Field trip.
Field trip,
Every
yeah,
Mountain
definitely.
Express,
Field trip.
This is
every Mountain
good.
Express ever made is down there too. I'll
We've
go.
got a
Sounds like a
whole-
holiday party.
We've got a whole list of completely different challenges related to trash and stormwater runoff that we could use your help on solving there. So thank you.
Yeah, if you want to change your commission names. Downtown can do it. All right, so we've got a yes, but with limited access for the majority. What's next? Do you think a shared street should allow some on-street parking and this is in addition to ADA spaces? And I think you should be inferring here that right now we do prioritize accessibility and consider it differently than other parking. Majority says no. Are there any streets in particular that you think should be shared streets in downtown?
Don't say Wall Street.
This is the tougher one, right? Especially after just hearing the challenges on Banks and Buxton. Andrew Fletcher, how about North Pack Square? So interesting with Walnut. And I'm wondering if people, because it's so steep on, I'd say the majority of it, or if people are just really talking about, that gets to this definition of like, what do you mean by shared street? For a place like Walnut. The old obelisk. I like the renaming of that to the old obelisk. South Market and Eagle on weekends, Haywood Street sometimes. That's a much more nuanced answer. Interesting.
I just keep on thinking more after I click submit. Commerce Street, Aston Street, potentially. There's so many little ones that yeah, it could be a real long list.
So when those of you that said Lexington, what are you thinking for that? So that Lexington has got parking, it's got bulb outs with trees, it's got 2 vehicle travel lanes and a pretty blah bike lane in the uphill direction. And I'm thinking of, let's see, north of College. So are you thinking shut the whole thing down to cars, or are you thinking just on weekends shut it down, or something else?
Let's have Michael talk first. Hopefully Michael will answer this as well.
Yes, I'll take this one, or at least I'll give a crack at it. I know when we were walking these streets when a lot of this had come up initially last year. This was one that a lot of folks that were on that walking tour had looked at. And I think in particular for me, why it would be so advantageous is because there's a lot of space, number one, and it's densely packed with businesses. So there's a lot of storefronts that are relatively close together. If you think about Banks and Buxton, you didn't have a whole lot of density with businesses there. So I think that's a factor that we really need to think about. And then as far as Lexington's concerned, it would be fantastic if that could be pared down to a one-way with the remaining space being converted into pedestrian, pedestrian only. I think at least on that remaining lane, and then take the parking and allow the parklets and the eateries that we've talked about. You could also get a bike lane in there at that point. So a lot of space for utilization for a lot of different multimodal uses there.
Randy.
Yeah, I think one thing that we need to think about more robustly is when we talk about like only on weekends or things like that, then what, only for tourists? And we need to build an infrastructure that prioritizes multimodal transportation so that people have incentive to choose bikes or pedestrian or walking over driving a car. So it should be easier. So we should never have like a climbing only bike lane, for example, because the descending bike lane should give priority to people on bikes so that when the cars are backed up on that street, a bike can whiz by them in the bike lane, and people in the cars can look at that and say, oh, maybe I should ride my bike because I got home faster if I use that, bike as a mode of transportation. So really, it's not just accommodating tourists or people who are going downtown just to shop, but it's people that work there, the people that live there. They should be able to utilize a shared street or any other street and be incentivized to not drive their car there. You should be able to not have to have a car in Asheville. You should have easy enough transportation to get around by using transit and bikes and pedestrians. So every time we think about all these projects we're thinking about right now too, it shouldn't just be for people going downtown to visit or, to shop or to be a tourist. It should be for the entirety of the population downtown. So I think we just need to shift because it doesn't seem like we're thinking about that now.
Andrew.
I have to think that part of what we can look to for examples is what we already kind of do this sometimes for some reasons. Like if you look at like Laugh, has a history of shutting down Lexington. I know that's more of like a holiday, like street fair atmosphere, but we have to be able to learn something from the locations of those types of uses, along with Downtown After 5, and also sort of what we've seen works there. And I mean, obviously, the city looks at these situations and says, "Hey, it's already valuable for a time to shut a street down and go to for other uses." So I think those should sort of point the way to the places and uses that get considered.
Bill?
Yeah, I just want to echo what Michael was saying, and Randy, this time, and I think really early in the meeting, Randy, you said it similarly, is that I think when we look at the streets right now, what we see in today's world, we don't see everything we could see if we completely open up the envelope and consider different things in terms of policy, in terms of logistics, delivery solutions, in terms of parking, in terms of shuttles, in terms of all types of transportation. There's a lot of streets in our city that have a lot more room than we think they do. There are some pretty open spaces, and if we just rethink it and consider the sidewalk, the street, all a public space, I think we'll come up with much more valuable solutions than just seeing what we see right now. I just wanted to add that in there because I think it's just hugely important.
Thank you. How about Gio?
Now, I just wanted to remind y'all two instances where Lexington was closed down successfully, and everyone was on the street. One was the old Leaf Festival, Lexington Arts something. Remember? They would close that down. And Belshare, when we closed Lexington down, we had vendors and bicyclists and pedestrians and eateries all mingling, and it was wonderful. And I just want to remind you, we've done that before, and it's worked.
Joe.
First, I want to thank Gio for bringing up, Belshare, even though lots of people, revile it. But yeah, downtown was kind of shut down for 3 days, like lots of it. I wanted to chime in because I was one of the ones that put Walnut Street down. And I think this ties into something that Bill just mentioned of, if we kind of open up and really look at all the streets, like I realize that there's probably some business person that is either listening or might listen that is going to not like what I have to say, but I think you could close Walnut Street tomorrow. And there are so many other ways to get around that street being closed that it would just it's just one of those possibilities, like close it off and see what happens. Like Haywood Street was closed a lot for all the work that went on, going on with kind of the revitalization of Haywood. Yes, it affected things, but there are other ways around. And so when I look at a street like Walnut, it's one of those that there's so many other ways to get from one side to the other that we don't really need Walnut Street as a car only street. And that's really all it does right now.
Dean.
Yeah, I just want to say you have to keep in mind deliveries to all of our downtown restaurants, especially these beer trucks. And Walnut Street in particular, I'll use it as an example. They use Wall Street for delivering beer to all of the businesses on Broadway because they can't park their trucks on Broadway. So if we're going to close down streets, we have to keep in mind that they need to be able to do delivery. So we have to give them alternatives if we're going to shut down streets.
Dana. How about Maggie?
Wrong button.
Y'all, I'll get it, maybe. I guess I was gonna see if we could pivot, because part of me is like, we could play this game of like listing streets for a long time, but I think that we should have a criteria conversation instead, because I don't know, that might get us towards a policy solution. I mean, I love it, and I'm not trying to be a naysayer, but it's a fun game, but I also feel like criteria gets us in the policy neighborhood a little better.
And I think what folks are trying to do is name the streets to think about what it is about that street that makes it more conducive. So I appreciated everyone's comments, especially providing a little bit more information about the types of streets that you thought were suitable, because that is where we're going to get that criteria from. The next question is, do you think the city should convert a street to a shared street, even if the businesses on it are not supportive?
Maggie, yeah, I feel like this is a beginning dump to starting to work on that criteria. I hear your point. I also just wanted to bring up Walnut as an example. There's a specific example I have, and Dane, I heard your comments as well. There's an antique shop on Walnut that's been there for, I don't know, 50 years. There's a loading zone outside of their shop that really shouldn't be there. And we tried to work with our traffic engineer. We tried to find a different location. And basically, because they sell this large furniture, they get shipments, their customers have to carry these large things. There was nowhere else for them to do that. And so while I all the points are important. And again, we're just throwing these things at the wall together to see where we land. But eventually we will get down to the granular, and it does get really complicated.
Well, I guess you all have majority said yes, even if the businesses are not supported. So Michael and Ruth, Michael first, and we're gonna start wrapping up here in a few minutes.
I'm just going to point out, I think the terminology that we use is really important to kind of set people's minds right when we talk about this. Businesses get really worried about some of this stuff if we have the language that we're going to shut streets down completely to vehicular traffic. So I really like the terminology of pedestrian priority zones so much, because what that means is we can really pare down traffic to everything but essential traffic. Like loading, for example, or trucks and deliveries. Those types of things are really essential to people's businesses, and those need to continue. But there's nothing to prevent a truck like that from entering into a pedestrian zone with flashing lights going 1 mile an hour, and taking a yield to all the pedestrians. I've seen that happen and works quite well. So I think we just need to make sure that when we're talking to our business community, we're going to tell them, look, this is a net positive for you, or it should be anyway if it's done correctly.
Ruth?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that we do not forget the non-abled people when we look at shared streets. And, Asheville has a growing senior citizen population, and there are a lot of people that cannot get on and off of buses, and they need access to cars, even though, I used to be, a huge proponent of more parking lots. I've kind of changed, and I look at seeing the value of more shared spaces, but I think there's a population that we're not considering, and I don't want them to be forgotten.
Absolutely. Andrew.
I'd hate for us to get to a place where, as a policy, one business could hold hostage over 40 that could see benefit. And so I think that we have to be prepared to get consensus of less than 100% if we're going to be able to supply benefits at all from this program. So I think that there will be times when a single business that should not be the reasons that we forego offering these benefits to the remainder of the businesses on the street and the people that are going to be using them.
Great. Next question. Oop, let's go back to we're saving that one for the last, I believe now. Is that right, Dina?
The wrap-up questions.
That's okay. That's our wrap-up questions. So I just want to remind everybody that we had 3 things that we wanted you to definitely walk away with today. One is a better understanding of where the programs are right now, the challenges we're facing, and that public space management framework that we're just rolling out. It's a living document, and we're starting to use it as that framework. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that you should have a better understanding of the people that you're working with and the people on the other commission's viewpoints after all of this, and hopefully understand where those challenges, even in policy decision-making, might lie. And the third is mostly going to be explained right here with the next step slide, but an understanding of where city staff might be going, and how we are going to use your feedback to prioritize working on certain areas and move forward together, and how we can do that. So how we can do that is the Public Space Management Committee primarily. There are a lot of ways we can do it, but we want to focus on getting that up and running again. And we are going to, offline from this meeting, send out information that will make it more clear about who has been on that committee, what their representations were, because it was set up specifically so that we had a diverse group of stakeholders, and we heard from specific people as well as people at large. And we'll want to make sure that we re-examine if those are still valid stakeholder perspectives, if we need to add more, do less, change the at-large, all of that. But we are going to have that conversation with the few folks, including the chairs of these commissions. So if you are interested in that, I would suggest that you go ahead and talk to the chairs, and also probably CC Andrew Fletcher, who has chaired that group. That would be great. So resource development. So this is really important. As you know, the city of Asheville can do anything, but we can't do everything. So in order for us to make this a sustainable program where we can be asked and also perhaps be aspirational at some point, we need to develop some resources. And what we mean by that is not just money, but also we need time, and we need people, and we need partnerships. There's a lot of things that go into this. So the first thing we should say is that we are exploring funding options already and plan on continue doing that up, through at least, we have a plan through July, which is the end of our fiscal year. We have submitted a document to the city's ARPA application process. And what we're really looking for that is funding that would support the creation of an action plan. We really need a dedicated person. We responded and went over, above and beyond during COVID, but we all have other wonderful things that we need to focus on now. And we'd love to find the resources to get someone who could actually coordinate this work moving forward. So an action plan that would outline the engagement strategies that we need to do, the research that we need to do, the best practices that we need to do, physical analysis of these streets and sidewalks and other public space areas, because although we didn't get into it, sidebar, we do have opportunities, especially in the edges of some of our park spaces and some lesser thought of areas, to accomplish some of the goals we really want to with activating public space in a way that it creates amazing outcomes for everybody. So that that ARPA grant application we'll hear back, in January, like everybody else. We'll also consider putting in a request in the city's supplemental budget process. And we'll look for outside funding sources. So, without naming names or going down those paths, there's always grant opportunities that may be appropriate. And we'll still be considering some of these COVID response pieces of it, but we know we also need to think about it from the larger perspective of long-term, what's going on in our public realm and how can we transition these things. And like I said, perhaps be aspirational. You heard a lot about the challenges. And so for each of these, we feel strongly that we've got some key areas to work on. So for parklets and streeteries, the biggest one is to have decent program standards and permitting guidelines. Dana mentioned, other folks mentioned, we're really making a lot, as much as we had got, you can find those guidelines online. As much as we had that document, there were a lot of one-off decisions that had to be made, and it's somewhat time consuming. We didn't, we had equity issues, we had fairness in a different way type of issues. And we would love to get some of those things nailed down so that people who want this could have some clarity. And speaking of that team, it was like a 12-person team that would do application review because we needed to look at all different aspects of what they were proposing to do in the public realm. And then what we really lacked, and everybody's lacking labor right now, is that enforcement aspect. So none of us wants to give people the opportunity to do this so that they can operate more safely and then end up making things so that maybe our public realm actually becomes less safe for other people. We need that to be a big investment moving forward. And then we talked about fees a lot. So fees for everything but parklets and streeteries, especially the privatization of public space, understanding what those should be. And I should do a sidebar on that as well, that people and our staff are already looking at. We should anticipate that any program we have moving forward is going to have fees, and that fees for some of our other programs in the public realm, whether that's like encroachments for A-frame signs or sidewalk dining, we'll need to look at those as well to make sure that we're being consistent across the board with our fee structures. Shared streets. This one is a big gray area for us because we've had maybe the least amount of investment in some ways in this. When we say continue to work with the community to find goals and roles, many of the programs that you'll see that look really exciting, the community is the one that is maintaining those programs when you have shared streets. So a lot of the neighborhood shared streets in New York, for instance, there are neighborhood watch groups, what have you, that are taking those barricades down, putting those barricades up, making sure that there's programming, making sure it's clean, it's safe, and having partnerships and even written agreements with the city and other entities, because there's definitely more than just the city government that's involved or has a stake in this. So those are just some of the things that we're going to be looking at. Let me take this question from Michael.
On the shared streets, are we going to be looking at this outside of the downtown area? Because I know, for example, here in Oakley, we had a successful open streets day on Thompson Street where we closed down the street. And there's a lot of questions that we were getting on our leadership team with the neighborhood association of whether or not that was something that we could open up on a regular basis, perhaps like every Sunday. So I don't know if you guys have considered that as part of your conversations, but I would request on behalf of that association that we think outside of downtown too.
Yeah, great point. We have thought about it. That would be good, but of course we also have to create some kind of scope at first, some kind of geographic scope.
Okay.
Randy?
Yeah, so also too, at the very beginning of the conversation, someone from the downtown commission said that they're also concerned with access to downtown. And so I think that that's something also we need to continue to think about too, because like Merriman Avenue, for example, the city would like to get a road diet on it, and NCDOT's not really, I wouldn't say fighting us on it, but they're not welcoming it a whole lot too. But that's a huge project because that runs right into downtown, and having access to downtown to be able to take advantage of the things we're talking about today is super important too. So that's kind of the next step too, is extending this conversation out to those type of things. And one of the focuses of the Multimodal Transportation Commission this next year is to have a connected bike network. And that's a big part of it. If we can make streets that come into downtown part of that connected bike network, then that changes the dynamic of the downtown space as well.
Thank you. It's definitely an interconnected web. Everything we work on leads to everything else. So some wrap-up questions for you. This one's important. Which of these initiatives has the most potential for advancing racial equity? I do want to make a comment too that I know that you have the council liaisons or actually voting members in the case of Downtown Commission listening in, and you know, the budget process is upcoming in the spring, and council will reset their priorities. And what I should be saying to you, or all of staff should be saying to you, is that there are things that we would like to do, but we also pay close attention and we're directed by the work of the city manager, who's directed by the requests of city council. So there are some really big initiatives this year that we're going to be focusing on. Reparations is probably the biggest one, and then that's one of the reasons why we have this question up here at the end of this discussion. So which of the initiatives has the most potential for creating, this is back to downtown, creating an inclusive, welcoming, and accessible downtown, which were some of the most submitted words for what makes a great public space? Great. And just as a reminder, I think it's important to know that when we started this program, it was a COVID response program. And so while inclusive, welcoming, and accessible was a goal, our primary goal was public safety for business operations. Which of the initiatives has the most potential for supporting local businesses and the local economy? That's a tough one, maybe.
I'm going to put in a pitch for sidewalk merchandise because if you want to talk about how people can generate business opportunities from almost nothing and really creating a very low rung on the ladder of entrepreneurship, like this is something tangible the city could do. And so particularly I've been a champion of merchandise permits for street performers. So that's one example that's in my wheelhouse. But there could be a lot of others, and I think is when we looked at our recent quality of life based on income and costs, like I think a wonderful thing that the city could do is create micro opportunities for people who are willing to take those first steps into entrepreneurship, and using sidewalks in a way that supports those goals. I think would be really strong, especially when you talk about racial equity and trying to bring people back to downtown that formerly were there.
Joe.
You know, when I read that, I look directly at that word potential, and the shared streets embodies all the other three before it. I mean, including what Andrew's just talking about now. I mean, you do a shared street, all those other three, plus things we haven't even thought about are in that one. So to me, that's a no-brainer.
Thank you for mentioning the things we haven't thought about / talked about today, because there are quite a few. Which of these has the most potential for advancing multimodal transportation goals? we're starting to lean here. Lean in a certain direction. Okay. So just recapping kind of on the next steps and where we're going from here, and Dana and Jessica and other staff can chime in. But I think what we are going to do is watch this entirely from start to finish again, instead of participating in it. Get your comments in some kind of report-like format so that we can report back to you all what we heard. And what you're going to be doing after that is thinking about where it looks like, keeping in mind what city staff has to do, and the fact that we are trying to get additional resources right now, where it looks like your priorities sit, and whether or not the Downtown Commission and the Multimodal Commission share those kind of same priorities. What else, Dana, Jessica, David, if he's still on? And the Public Space Management Committee, I'll just reiterate that part as an important piece of that. So in addition to knowing the short term, what your priorities are, being able to participate long term on the Public Space Management Committee is an opportunity for you. Maggie?
I just wanted to lift up that a handful of us across the two commissions got together a couple times before this meeting and talked about a lot of this. This meeting gave us a lot more detailed context, which is nice. But I wanted to see if we could use the power of this commission, this coming together, which we've never done before. And as far as I know, no other committees have done before, to actually not just give input, but to give leadership direction. And something that came from that group, which I would ask you to raise hands, but it's hard because not everyone's on the screen, but a bunch of us were part of that. We kind of came to a recommendation that when designing downtown shared spaces guidance, prioritize the needs of space for pedestrians first and parking last. And I know that I forget what acronym is, but the committee that you're talking about is the Public Spaces Committee that Andrew's been chairing is going to get rebooted. But I feel like I would like us to have spent this amount of time being this thoughtful to point that group in a direction based on the cross commissions more than just our comments and input. So I guess I'd curious from the group to entertain, like, we down for that recommendation? Would someone second that to be like a guiding force for the detailed design analysis that follows from here?
Dana?
I don't want to interrupt that question.
Okay, so I thought maybe you were responding to her. So does anybody want to respond first to Maggie before we go to the other ones, which I thought were?
I'll second that, Maggie. And I was one of the folks that had walked around with the group. But yeah, absolutely. I really do think that if there's anything to be gleaned from this is to know that we've got a lot of space that is being, I think, advocated to vehicles right now. And that's not something that is inherent to our history. That's something that's only developed over the past 80 to 100 years since cars have been here. So I would say it should be our prerogative to put pedestrians and people first over cars.
Dana, does the public space management framework speak to that?
It does on a program or use specific basis. So I mean, the broad language I think is great in terms of how that applies. I think you just have to look at the individual programs or decisions being made. So yes, it does.
Okay. Andrew?
Yeah, I was on that group that walked around and sort of did some focuses on a few areas, but also some big themes about sort of kind of like what Michael said. This idea of that cars having primacy is about 80 years old, and I think it's led to some very dissatisfying results. And people are all now, especially after COVID, ready for a new way of looking at things, which I think is we're all in a moment of action here that just probably couldn't have taken place a couple of years ago. So I really want to use it. I really want to use this this new type of thinking. So I'm going to make a couple of suggestions about how organizationally how we can go forward. First off, I've really enjoyed this meeting. I think this has been really helpful, and I will suggest that to make this an annual event. And I would also invite Multimodal to send representatives to the Public Space Management Committee, perhaps even in a co-chair or vice chair fashion, so that we've got good leadership that's reporting back to these commissions and doing good communication there. So those are going to be my suggestions about on the sort of the commission side, how we can operationalize and be helpful to you guys on the staff side going forward.
Thanks. In the interim, I just want to remind folks, to Maggie's point, that, you know, your annual reports are going to be due at the end of January to City Council. So there is an opportunity to provide statements directly to city leadership. Dana?
Back to Maggie's question and bringing up the public space management guidelines, that's something maybe we can look at stating that in a more overarching way, right? Because we have this project and maybe there's other ways to make that recommendation, but maybe we can look at that too more broadly. But I did want to say, you know, and it sounds like maybe we're still thinking a little bit about if different groups continue. Obviously, and especially with the last questions, there's a lot of interest and opportunity for shared streets. And I would just encourage you all to continue thinking about that and what that looks like and who would be involved and what that, you know, how the community might initiate or participate and who would be involved. And I would just encourage you all to dig in a little bit more on that, because I think, you know, it's not something the city's going to be able to do alone, especially programming aspects. So I just would encourage that.
Maggie put a proposal in the chat, which I recorded in our comments section. So she's saying Public Space Management Committee can reconvene with a guiding direction from this cross-commission meeting that we design downtown spaces that prioritize the needs of and space for pedestrians first and parking last. We have lost quite a few participants during this meeting. I understand it was a very long meeting. We're so thankful for folks who were able to make any of it. So, Maggie, I'm not sure if you're proposing that this group adopt a resolution now, or it's something that the two commissions can think about separately when their full bodies are reconvened and have time to say to the, like, I would suggest that maybe you would want to make that public on an agenda and say, hey, we want to adopt a resolution perhaps. That way you could get some public comment on it. Does that sound good?
I mean, that's an option. I will say that, like, leading into this meeting, the group, each of the different committees talked with staff during public comment, during our different committees, talked about having a subcommittee. We reported back to staff that we wanted to start with a recommendation of this nature. So I feel like it's kind of gone through the process, and then it's coming up now. So, I mean, we can go back through different conversations, but I guess what I am very eager to make sure that we have going forward is that we don't have any language in any of our policy documents that really lifts this type of sentiment up. And I'm not saying that we're creating a policy document. That's not what we're authorized to do, but that really ensuring that the input session that had so much universal support throughout the entire meeting gets really codified in a single statement. Otherwise, it can get diluted as time happens and as space happens and as, you know, our comments get summarized by staff.
Ruth?
Yeah, I just feel like the Downtown Commission is not fully represented at this meeting. And I think doing a resolution now is, in my opinion, not appropriate. I think that the Downtown Commission needs more time to discuss this when we have a full membership available. And I'd also love to be able to have all of the documents that were included. I must have missed an email or something and didn't get the documents. So it would have been helpful to have had all those presentations prior to this meeting so we could have studied them at our leisure. And I think it would have been a lot more productive as far as the conversation goes. So I would, if you take a vote, I will vote no.
So we can get that. Yeah, we absolutely meant to get the presentation to you in advance, and our apologies for that. It was just an oversight with having a hyperlink, but we'll change that moving forward, and we can get that presentation out to you tonight. We can get tomorrow probably the draft of the public space management framework document out to you, so you could take a look at that. It is a lot of information. We'll make sure that everybody on both commissions gets that information. And then I would ask the chairs of both of the commissions to, consider Maggie's proposal at your upcoming meetings. Consider adding it or not adding it is what I mean.
So is there a time when this group will come back together?
That is up to you all. Yep, that is up to you all. There's, we're happy. I think this was actually really great for us to have this many people with diverse perspectives at one time. So I just want to encourage you to come back together. Maggie's comments about commissions coming together more often is, it's really a salient point. I think before we had a great retreat. I know with the Riverfront Commission and the Downtown Commission went to Atlanta a couple of years ago and did a ton of work together. And the more that we can get folks to do that, the better. So, but that again is, it takes, we'll talk to the chairs and see what folks think. And in the same vein, we are also going to make sure that we have this public space management committee fully formed with members from both of you and other folks.
Just for the record, I'd like to volunteer for that. Whoever needs to know, I think that'd be great.
I just wanted to make.
Go ahead, Joe.
Sorry, I just wanted to make a quick comment. I'll certainly will get this information over to everyone else on planning and zoning. Also, I know we've just planning and zoning. I've talked to some of the current members, and certainly looking to take some of the information. Again, do that cross commission information sharing. So there were all of these different commissions that look at all of these spaces. Can be thinking about how do these things get moved forward. So
thank you, everyone. We really appreciate your time and your incredible interest in these topics. It's always helpful for us, and I hope that you have a good evening. And for those that we won't see, really happy holidays continued. Take care.
Thank you.
You'll be hearing from us very soon.
Yeah.
We've got a lot to put together for you. Thanks so much.
thanks for all the work.
Thanks, Steph.
Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Stephanie, and the staff, for all your hard work. Appreciate it.
This has been one of the more interesting meetings I've had this year. So really, really fun to see this group of people and these perspectives together. So thanks everybody.